Hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you so much for attending today. It is Earth Day, and what better day to talk about sustainability? That's not true. We should talk about sustainability every day, folks. It's very important, and I've got some really lovely people joining me today to talk about it. Before we dive in, I'd like to thank our lovely sponsors. To keep the conversation going, you're welcome to check out any of these handles on our screen right now. At Femmes du Vin, we have at Jackson Family Wines. And if you wanted to tag us in any of these and keep that chat going, go to hashtag FdV Spring 2021 and hashtag Jackson Family Wines. Before we really dive in here, I would love it if we could dive into some housekeeping details just to keep ourselves organized and know what's coming. So we are going to be together for 90 minutes here. With that 90 minutes, 60 minutes will just be a really wicked conversation with some really badass women in our industry. And then we have a moment to actually have some Q&As. So it's not actually going to be Q&A submitted through the chat box down below, but if you look down below here, you will have your Q&A selection where we have our lovely team who will go through the questions and then they will send it over to me later. So please, I would like it if we can take a quick moment to support FdV, Femmes du Vin, by donating at any time. The scholarship fund is www.femmesduvin.org. And please, please, please give me a moment to thank Jackson Family Wines as well, because they are so lovely to have us all here together today. So today, I get to be joined, as I mentioned, by some really wicked women in our wine industry who are just spearheading sustainability and making sure that we're able to keep our earth happy, healthy, and also make some really delicious wine as well. Today I have Samantha Aguilar. She is the lab manager at Cambria. She leads the sustainability committee as well, and she knows a thing or two about SIP. We also have Sarah Withrich. She is the head winemaker at Maggie Hawk. She is a smart lady. She has a degree in viticulture and enology from the University of California as well. Please say hello to her. And then I also have Eugenia Keegan. Man, this lady seems like she can give anybody the boots. She's a smart kitten. She's the VP of the winery operations for Jackson Family Wines for their Oregon properties as well. Say hello to the lovely women in the wine world of sustainability who will be joining me today. Now, I think it's so important to start off just by talking about what sustainability is, because I feel like there's so much confusion. People aren't really as educated in the wine world about sustainability, and it's really a new thing that's been coming to light, I'd say, over the past 5 years or so. Eugenia, can you please tell us a little bit more about what sustainability looks like to you and the certification processes that it entails?
Yeah, thank you, Shiva. It's very exciting to be here with you and of course my colleagues today and all of you out in Zoom land. Sustainability is of course a word that's used routinely, and if you look it up in the dictionary, it tells you that it's about maintaining a certain level or rate. And if that's truly the definition, Jackson Family Wines is not sustainable. We are so far beyond sustainable. It is not our job every day to maintain what we have. That is just simply not the work ethic that we have, or the passion that we bring to what we do. We're trying to improve every day on what we do. And I think you'll discover over the course of this conversation that everything we know about sustainability and the practices that we employ at JFW is really, it's an ongoing education, it's an ongoing learning, and it's an ongoing improving ourselves in everything we do every day. So let's talk a little bit about what those things are, and let's start with the certifications that you can get, and those can be very confusing. Certainly the two that are most noted are biodynamics and organic, and both of those are third-party certifications There's organic tilth, that's Oregon tilth, that's out of that was started in Oregon, and that sets up the main pyramid and requirements. And then biodynamic Demeter is also has a whole set of requirements that that you literally fill out paperwork every year, and you work very hard at improving your particular piece of property. But one of the primary differences between the two is organic is about how you farm we're talking about vineyards here, so how you work your vineyard and your vines. Biodynamic is much greater than that. It's a whole property approach. So it's not just about your grapevines, it's about everything that grows and lives on your property. And if you really do subscribe to biodynamics, you have all of the animals and that are required for the work that you do in your gardens and your vineyards. And you grow all of the nettles and the chamomile and the things that you use for the preparations. So it's a very contained and whole property approach. And there's been a true evolution on those. The one that we use in Oregon is called LIVE, L-I-V-E, and it incorporates the whole property concept. And we look at all of the chemistries that we might be using to deal with pests and other issues that we have in growing grapes. And it is a third-party certification. So again, a rigorous group of paperwork that you fill out to be sure that you are maintaining all of the requirements of that. But in live, you can never attain a full or finished live status, because live is constantly evolving. It's about constant improvement. So you might get to a certain level, and then that's great. Congratulations. Take a deep breath, pat yourself on the back, and get back to work, because you simply haven't done enough. And so this is really the rigor that we put to not just our vineyards, but our wineries and the businesses that we run. So it's a full concept. It's not just agriculture. With us today, Samantha, my colleague in California, Jackson Family, they use in California a certification program, called SIP. Samantha?
Yeah, absolutely. So SIP, otherwise known as Sustainability in Practice, is one of the two main sustainability certifications here in California. A lot of the sustainability certifications are fairly similar. It's always it's a third-party licensing, but also it's always a standard of improvement. You have 16 to 20 different things that you are kind of not judged on, but metrics that you need to reach. And you can always get that one group, and then there's always more to do to reach the next level of certification and to reach the next level of certification. And the great thing about sustainability is, while yes, it does include a lot of the vineyard practices, it goes also more into the social and business aspects of it, making sure that you're treating your employees well, you're providing them training, you're providing them healthcare, keeping them educated with ongoing certifications, and overall just making sure that you're treating your employees well. Here at Cambria, we have employees that have been with us for 30 plus years. So yeah, I mean, just to kind of show the level of commitment that not only do they have to the company and the wines, but the commitment that we have for our employees. And then going out to your community, making sure you're involved in your community, because you want your community to be around. You know, it's all well and good that we keep our business going, but if there isn't a community around us, what good does that do? So go and reach out to the community, get involved.
That is so wonderful. Now, I have a question, just because, you know, we go North America, especially the US, you guys have these certifications, you guys have organizations in place like this of Live and SIP, but then in Europe, you don't. And a lot of people see being sustainable as a way of life and almost a religion. So, you know, why would they pay for something like that? Do you feel like, how do you guys feel about that, out of curiosity? Do you feel that, like, by paying and getting that certification, you're able to have more regulations governmentally, or do you feel that maybe what they're doing is okay as well, as long as they're doing it?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of both. If you're doing it, great, that's fantastic. Having this third party accountability, though, makes it to where it's not greenwashing, where you're saying you're doing all these things, but you're not actually doing it. You have accountability with a third party certification. So yes, we're paying these fees to get certified, but it's kind of a put up or shut up kind of situation where, yes, we have these certifications because we're walking the walk. We're doing these things that we're supposed to be doing.
I love it. Now, greenwashing is this term that I would say that did not necessarily exist about a decade ago. What is greenwashing? What is this?
Greenwashing is just companies who they want to show that they're, being environmentally conscious. So they will put forth this face, but, in the background, they're tossing out a lot of plastics, or they're not having a lot of sustainable practices. It's a way to kind of get on the bandwagon of, hey, we're sustainable, but not actually doing the work.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the great things about having a third-party certification is we are doing the work and it's shown.
And it sounds like you're consistently held accountable by constantly trying to review and regenerate your practices as well. Now, I had a question for Sarah. While we're talking about greenwashing, can you tell me a little bit more about regenerative farming and what that is, what it looks like?
Right. So Eugenia touched on biodynamics and organics. Regenerative farming takes it a step further in that it encompasses social impact as well. So how your farming and your practices that you're bringing onto your vineyard or your farm are impacting the community at large and the earth. And so I think that's very important, especially in this current environment that we're in. It's not just about the product you're growing and making, it's about the humans and the animals that are involved in that process all along the way. So that's where regenerative farming kind of lifts the bar up a step from organic and biodynamic.
Well, the last time that we were talking, you had mentioned how you really you care about the people who you work with. And oftentimes I feel that, it's very important. But something that I think people forget about often as consumers are the people who are actually picking the grapes and managing your vineyards and working there all the time. And you mentioned how it was so important about considering heat, considering chemicals that you're using in the vineyards and their health, like their longevity as just a human being who is there to pick. I thought was so beautiful that, again, in your textbooks, I've never seen that. And that, in anything, in WSET, in Quartermaster Sommeliers, in any reading that you do, nobody ever actually considers the humans who are picking. There's heroic viticulture that might be, looked at in some areas, but nobody actually looks at that. Can you tell me about that a little bit more? There's a chance that there might be a little bit of a delay here. Can anybody else jump into this one out of curiosity?
Yeah, I think that when, we're farmers first, and that's what we do. And if our farms are not healthy, then our business simply doesn't exist. And it doesn't take very long to be in business, in our business in particular, but I would say this for any farming endeavor, that it's your raw material. Your raw material is where the quality comes from. And it's obviously, it is the most expensive part of a bottle of wine. So when you buy a bottle of wine, 70% of the cost of that bottle of wine are those grapes. And so it's very high. It's very high. And if this is the backbone of everything we do, and most winemakers that are of the highest quality spend quite a bit of time in their vineyards. So it's just as important for them that the health of the vineyard and the work that's being done there is healthy for the people that are there. And I think the beauty of live and sip, and now as we move to regenerative, these are all of advancements and improvements on what we're doing and now who's doing it. And that's really probably as basic as we can get. And Samantha pointed it out as well as anybody with the tenure. When we have our annual meeting at Jackson Family Wines, we start with everybody who's been here for more than 35 years, stand up. And 10% of the room stands up, for heaven's sakes. It's amazing. And you meet people all the time that have been with the company for years. So this has been part of the company's personal philosophy for many, many, many years. But now what's wonderful is that this philosophy is being incorporated into third-party certifications for agriculture. That's a big step up.
That's a huge step up. Now, just looking at all of this, as a consumer, as a somm, I've mentioned a couple times, you don't get educated about this topic. How do you think, well, first off, how do you think that that can be bettered? But also, when you're a consumer, when you're a somm, and you only have X amount of time, realistically less than a minute, to actually look at a bottle, evaluate if that's the bottle you want. How do we change that? How do we get that conversation going to entice people and get people excited about the fact that what sustainability is and how it translates into a bottle is really important for the longevity of the world and wine?
Well, there's two ways. People that subscribe to these certifications are very proud of the work because it is rigorous. And a lot of people don't do this work or drop out because of the rigor of the work. And to Samantha's point, that's what keeps the rails on us. You can't slip up, or maybe don't do it quite as effectively because you are going for these certifications. So we proudly put those on the labels. So if you pick up that bottle and you look at that back label, you'll see live or SIP or salmon safe or some sort of sustainability certification on that label. Secondly, of course, is that you learn to trust certain purveyors. We do this with food. We do this if you're buying cars, if you're buying clothes, if you're going to the movies, you have these actors or these directors. So we tend to buy from those that we have confidence in. So if you have a brand or a company that makes wines that subscribe to these programs, then they're going to continue to do that. So I think that's how a consumer can feel confident they're getting a product that is adhering to these levels of responsibility.
That's and really if I could just add on real quick, I know at least with SIP, they provide training for people in the tasting rooms and somms and things like that, all on their website, and it's all for free. And so it's almost kind of up to the winery to explain to their consumers, hey, this is sustainability. This is what we do. This is why it's important. So you have a lot of avenues to try and explain it. So yeah, it's just, getting it out in like maybe your wine club newsletter, or just finding ways through social media to try and promote that, especially on Earth Day. It's a perfect day to do it.
Now, Samantha, out of curiosity, so we've talked about societally about how you get the word out, and what sustainability looks like within a vineyard. What does it look like within the actual winery? Like, what happens when you're actually producing that wine? What happens when you're actually doing the back end of everything and working with your team? What does that look like?
Sure. So a lot of the winery aspects of it is definitely water conservation, especially here in California, but water conservation in general, reusing the processed water, getting it cleaned out in a reclamation pond, and then using that for irrigation out in the vineyards. Making sure that for sanitation for the wineries that we're using green chemicals, things that we know are going to be safe for the environment, things that are certified as eco-friendly, things like that, making sure that we have our volunteer days. And so we can go reach out to the community. There's lots of different ways to go about it in the vineyard in the winery. And it really is kind of a holistic approach, and you have to make sure you have buy-in of all of your staff. So you have to make it easy to be able to recycle. So we have a recycling program at the winery. We are starting to do composting at the winery. So we really want to incorporate it into our day-to-day lives.
Lovely. Sarah, you're back.
Yes, sorry.
She made it, folks.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Wi-Fi during this time. It's just a great time that I'm sure everybody can relate to. I don't know where we left off, but we've been talking about some really great things of just what sustainability looks like within the actual winery itself. We've been talking about how to get the word out. What can you tell us from where we left off?
well, I think one thing as far as regenerative agriculture, what we're doing within Jackson Family Wines is we're starting trials in about 15% of our vineyards. We own roughly 13,000 acre vineyards up and down California and Oregon. And so we're going to look at incorporating some trials for regenerative practices in those vineyards. But I'm part of the group to really look at how that affects wine quality. And so typically we start these things in the vineyard, but carrying it all the way through to winemaking and then wine ageability, I think is equally as important to see the quality effects from these practices. And so that's kind of the next step for our company, is looking at those things.
That's awesome. Now, also the last time we were chatting, you were telling me about, well, we should just talk about this in general. It's Earth Day. We're talking about sustainability. Climate change is a real freaking thing, pardon my language. But you were telling me about how are you dealing with things like smoke taint? How are you communicating with other places around the world and other winemakers around the world to better the scenario? And are you doing that in general? Do you have a community?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are trying times, and climate change is presenting itself, whether it's frost that we saw in Burgundy and Chablis this year, to fires that we've been seeing for the last, 3 vintages here in Sonoma County, Northern California. So, and also up in Eugenia's neighborhood in Oregon. So it's just crazy. And I think what I've come away from with this, as extreme as these circumstances are, is how much we've come together as a winemaking community to share things, because this is all relatively new. We're essentially learning as much as we can on the fly. There's no right answer, but I think looking at what we could do to offset carbon emissions in our vineyards, and not just the planted properties of vines, but the ecological compensation areas, the stuff not planted to vines, how we can incorporate trees and cover crop to really sequester that carbon back into the soil. But getting back to the point about a community, it's awesome. We're all sharing things that we're doing to mitigate smoke integration that's occurring in our wines. And it's necessary. I mean, we're all learning from this constantly.
Now, out of curiosity, do you, again, a question for everybody. These are very big changes that need to happen very quickly to be able to produce quality wine so that you are able to continue making wine for a long period of time, and representing your regions. Do you guys feel supported governmentally? Do you feel like you can make these changes quickly? What do you guys feel needs to happen, or is it happening already?
Governmentally, I mean, I don't know enough about the policies and procedures in place in our government, but what I do know is that at the basic level, our company supports that, and that's huge. Being a winemaker, working for a company that is leading kind of the way in sustainability and regenerative ag, and taking it under its wing and willing to do this is, it's important to me on a personal level, but to work for a company that is also on board with it, it means a lot.
That's awesome. Eugenia, how do you feel?
Well, it would be great. I mean, it's hard to talk about what the government does and doesn't do. And then when you change administrations, obviously the philosophy and the directive changes. Absolutely. And I think, and we obviously hope that our government is leading the charge in this global problem. But to Sarah's point, this is about taking personal responsibility, and Jackson Family as a business takes personal responsibility, whether we were talking about their employees a few minutes ago, or now we're talking about our vineyard holdings. Sarah was talking about something very important, which is the area of property that's not planted. in live, you have to maintain 5% of the total property in what we call biodiversity or this environmental opportunity. So it's mandated that you're looking at something like that, but you can have all the rules and regulations you want, and this comes down to the personal passion of the company. We are very fortunate that Gen 2 is starting to take over. They're sort of in their 30s and they're starting to flex their muscles a little bit. And you can imagine that their generation comes with a particular set of philosophies and approach to the world around them. And these kids were taught from the day they were born that the land was one of the most precious things you could ever have, and that it's finite, and that protecting it is your job. You are a steward of the property that you own. And so the kids, this is their mindset. This isn't something they have to think about every day. This is organic for them, or just natural for them to look at things that way. And so the company takes a very, very strong approach, and we can do just what we can do for ourselves, and then, to Sarah's point, be real leaders in our wine community. And I think people look to us routinely for maybe not the answers, but certainly what are we doing? And the Smoky Vintage was a perfect example of that. We have a robust in-house group. Samantha can speak more directly to it because it's the people that are working in the labs. We have our own lab with our own PhDs that work on this, but they don't work in isolation. They work with the bigger community, with our land-grant universities and independent universities. So it's a real sharing of information. One of the things that people talk about the community and how close-knit certainly our Oregon community is, but at the end of the day, it's us against Mother Nature. I hate to use the word against with mother, but we're trying to work against some of the tribulations of the environment and agriculture. So we tend to work together that way. And I think that's true of all ag communities. And so it's really rewarding to work for the leader in this kind of work in our industry.
I think that's really awesome that you say that it is agriculture at the end of the day. And that's really important to see, because I think that often is lost. But Samantha, can you tell us more about what Eugenia was mentioning?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we have an amazing research and development team that looks at all different aspects of winemaking, all different things that kind of come with having to deal with Mother Nature, specifically with these smoke affected grapes, and trying different ways to mitigate it. And it's not only just in-house in that lab, which is up north, but we're talking throughout the enterprise, getting information, trying different things, whether it's filtration or whether it's whatever they're using. Just getting, sending samples out for people to taste. Hey, what do you prefer? Did you see a difference? And really just putting their nose to the grindstone for all hours, trying to find different ways to work with products, even trying to find different ways to make wine that would use less water, or different products that could make wines more cold stable without having to use as much energy. They do a lot of work, and it's really been amazing to see the company come together as a whole and discuss all their different trials and discuss all these different projects and share all the information.
That's awesome. Now, I'm talking about products and sustainability, and looking at the future, bottles, bottles being used. Is this sustainable? Are there other ways of going about sustainability that you guys feel that maybe in the future would be a good possibility, or ways to make your wine production more sustainable, and not just yours, but in general in the world?
I know Eugenia feels very strongly about bottles.
And I do,
thank
you, Samantha. I do feel strongly. The single largest insult in our profession is our glass bottle. That and the transportation to move it from the plant to our bottling, to our wineries, is very, very energy used. And it's really a challenge, because we look at lots of alternative packaging. And I was sitting with the owner of the company talking about that. And I was worried that it was sort of an aesthetic thing because wine has come in glass bottles with cork finishes for obviously lots of years. And it's the way that we learn about wines and we look at the packaging. And the answer really surprised me. And it was so typical of the way we view things. Barbara said, the owner of the company, not that it was the look of the packaging or having to retrain the consumer as to what a new package would look like. The problem was we haven't found a package that would allow the wines to age. So you can put them in screw caps and you can put them in cardboard and you can put them in, lined cardboard. You can put them in all sorts of different vessels. But one of the things that we do in our winemaking is we make wines to age. That's a big part of the wine. These are not just wines. We recognize that most wines are consumed within, no time at all of our packaging them. And that's great because we're in the business of selling wine. So please buy it, open it, drink it. But a lot of the higher end wines that we make are designed to go into the cellar. And we haven't found any alternative that would allow for the ageability of wine. Believe me, we're looking. We do use as light a glass bottle as you can. And you should see the trials for this, which is going to the top of one of our winery buildings and dropping a case of wine that's in styrofoam to see how it would do if you send it through the mail or through UPS. And at some point, there's a certain amount of weight, and in fact, they break. And then there's a certain point where they don't. And so that's the lightest glass available, and that's what we use along with a lot of other people. But so far, we haven't been able to move that one step closer. We do buy glass now from plants that are really close to our wineries. So we've cut transportation down. It's been tradition that you would buy your bottles from France and you would bring them over, or from China where it was cheaper and bring them over. Well, we don't do anything like that. We find them from the plant that's closest to us. So the transportation is the shortest, but it is probably the single largest challenge that we have in the entire wine industry, talking about how can we lessen our footprint.
Absolutely. Now, going right back. We've talked about glassware, but Sarah, I realized that we lost you right at the point of regenerative farming, where I actually wanted to ask, are there certifications for it? And how, what are the practices within it, out of curiosity?
Yes, there is a certification for it. It is rather rigorous, and you have to not only pay fees to get yourself regenerative organic certified, you have to file for it and get somebody who is an auditor to come audit you, and then you have to do that annually. So it is rather rigorous if you choose to go down that path. Just like biodynamics or organics, you can choose to pay the fees and get an auditor to come out and certify you. Many choose to just incorporate those practices without going through all of the hoops to get there.
Gotcha. And out of curiosity, just looking at what Eugenia was saying about bottles and seeing if it's going to actually age well, if it's going to taste well, do you feel
right.
that with regenerative farming, do you feel that with sustainable practices, do you feel that it makes better wine? Does it taste better? Do you feel better?
Yeah, but I don't know. The ones that I've tasted so far that have been, more on the organic and biodynamic side, I have yet to taste wine from a regenerative organic certified vineyard. But from what I tasted, and I feel there is potential there. And I think that it's not just beneficial for the product you're producing, but the greater world as a whole. So I think there's benefits in all directions going in this method.
That's awesome, because I find that oftentimes, and we haven't talked about this at all, but natural wine, it's trendy, it's sexy, sometimes incredibly inconsistent. Yeah. And sometimes it's tasty, but you're paying a pretty penny, and sometimes it does not taste good. So in this,
right.
when you're looking at a very a technically holistic approach, and I think it's important to realize that we're looking at guidelines here in every scenario, but there are no guidelines in natural wine. And please, nobody, don't hate me. I think there are some tasty ones out there, but it's tough to find them sometimes. But do you guys, when comparing to natural wine, is there a little bit more stability with sustainably produced wines versus natural wines? And would you at all put them in the same category?
I think many, and Eugenia can chime in here too. I think I prefer a low intervention approach. That's how I like to talk about the winemaking approach that I have with my wines at Maggie Hawk. And I think the main difference is sulfur. Sulfur is a preservative. It helps you, maintain your wine stability, microbial activity, and I think, without it, it's hard to make wines that are consistently good and age well. And anyways, I think that natural wine has this, there's a limit to how much sulfur you can add to be considered an official natural wine. And so my question is it a better wine? Would you like to spend, that $30 to $50 on a natural wine, not really knowing what you're getting in a bottle? Or would you be willing to purchase a wine that has been made with low intervention practices, maybe has a little more sulfur, but is more consistent?
And guidelines as well, I think, is really important. I think that's what people often forget about, that like you have guidelines in your practice, whereas perhaps in natural wine, you don't have any regulatory factors.
Right.
Yeah, they're not regulatory in terms of somebody outside managing what it is you do. And Sarah really nailed it, because the only issue is sulfur. There is nothing unnatural that we do. So it's hard to have the conversation, because other than sulfur addition, there is nothing else. There's nothing else. So it's like, well, wait a minute, where's the unnatural part? So there's some sort of concept that there are chemistries and things that you can use in winemaking, and there are some things that you can do, but not at this level, not in what we're trying to talk about. So there is nothing unnatural except the use of sulfur, if that is what one wants to point to. So that makes that whole conversation a little challenging. But to Sarah's point, you are intentionally allowing your product to lack stability and ageability and maintain its microbiological stability. So you're allowing it to be vulnerable. It's a little like saying there's a piece of meat and it's been sitting on the counter. At what point will you eat it, and what point won't you eat it? And then if you put it in the refrigerator, which is the natural thing to do, then is that natural? Because it's electricity, and you took that wasn't natural, that electricity. So would you say, well, that's okay, I'll eat meat that's been sitting on the counter for 7 days, rather than put it in the refrigerator? Because if I'm using the refrigerator, I'm using electricity. There are refrigerants in that refrigerator, which gives off greenhouse gases. So, your refrigerator is not a sustainable situation. So I think it's really important to understand what these terms mean. And if it's the use of sulfur, and that is considered unnatural, then that would be the one unnatural thing. But otherwise, all we use is grapes. It's just grapes. We squish them.
Yeah.
We squish them. We put them in
ferment them.
barrels, and then we put them in bottles. We really don't do anything else.
Now, out of curiosity, with the bottles that you guys are putting them in, are they at all recycled? Are you guys getting brand new bottles? Like how does that work exactly? And do wineries use recycled bottles at all?
They do. So there's reused and then recycled, where the glass is broken and melted down and redone. The reuse problem, we did a lot of reusing in the 80s and the 90s, and my young colleagues on the phone may not remember this, but the problem, it was a company in Berkeley. I won't say their name because of the problems that they had, but it was very difficult to sterilize those bottles. once they had had wine in them, so that they were 100% sterile. And they thought they were 100% sterile, but people who started using those bottles found that there was microbial leftovers. And so you ended up tainting your wine by putting them in these bottles. So that company went out of business, and that process is basically not used anymore.
Wow.
The actual melting down and making new glass is certainly an activity. It is a marketing problem because when, number one, you do have to use a lot of energy to do this. It doesn't melt down at without a big fire. But then when you put it all back together, the product that you have doesn't look like new glass because you can't maintain the purity of color. So we have clear glass, green glass, brown glass. And even though when you take them to the recycling center, you throw them in different bins, somebody makes the mistake of putting a brown bottle in the clear bin, and then that taints the glass as it's refired and reused, or I shouldn't say taint, changes the color. So from a marketing point of view, this kind of repurposed glass is not very popular.
I see. Do you mind? Oh, sorry. Yes, Samantha.
So no, it's okay. I know something that we do in our tasting room when we have bottles is we'll save it and we'll send it to a local crafter who uses them to make candle holders and things like that. So there are other ways to reuse bottles, even if you are not recycling them, like dumping them in your recycling bin, which we also do. But saving some of our higher end bottles for local crafters is a great way to get that involved as well.
That's really awesome. Now, with this in mind, where do you guys feel that sustainability is going with Jackson Family Wines, and where it can be going in the world as well?
I think with sustainability, the key is to make it something easy to do. You have to, in order for people to get on board, people to have a buy-in, you need to make it accessible. And so I know with Jackson Family, we are looking at different ways to save water with barrel washing and finding ways like the lighter glass to minimize our transportation footprint, things like that. I'm sure we have a whole team dedicated to sustainability with Jackson Family Wines, and they are amazing. And they have lots of ideas that they've been working on. We are working towards all of our facilities being zero waste, which is fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
what does that look like, if I may ask? How does that happen?
We're still in the process at Cambria, but it really is, it's when you're purchasing things from suppliers, you want to make sure that you can either return them back to the suppliers for recycling, or doing things like composting, taking all of the pumice from harvest and composting that, sending it back out to the vineyard or to local farmers for cattle feed. Using recyclable materials in our packaging, like styrofoam. I have a place that I know will recycle styrofoam. Thankfully, we don't use styrofoam in our packaging. But even with bottling the shrink wrap stuff, I found a place that will recycle all the shrink wrap, which you can't recycle normally. So just finding other avenues to minimize our waste stream to where we really don't have much of a waste stream. That's been a huge proponent of the sustainability committee as a whole with Jackson Family Wines.
Constant improvement is there are always things to do, and things that we aren't even on our radar screen, aren't even in our imagination. But as Samantha says, we have a really great team, and they are constantly looking at the big picture. It's our job at the winery level to execute what they're working on. But they're as Samantha says, zero waste, and by 2030 we have this initiative and that initiative, and they're all this constant improvement. And we probably don't know half of what we should be doing, but we're looking at it. We're trying.
You're still trying. That's awesome.
Right.
I think that's what matters.
Well, I'd like to chime in on some of the stuff we are looking at, which is our goal is by 2030 to reduce our carbon emissions by 50%. And by 2050, we'll become, carbon positive, actually be giving back. So with some of that, we're looking at electric tractors in our vineyards. We've purchased a couple of the Monarch tractors to use. which is incredible. And with the labor shortage, they can actually be driven remotely via iPad. Yeah, it's pretty awesome technology. We are looking at water conservation at all of our winery facilities. Samantha touched on it about recycling the water that we use to rinse our barrels with, looking at pond water, how to desalinate those and reuse the water back in the winery. We're looking at, like we talked about, regenerative farming. That's the team that I'm heavily involved on, looking at our vineyard properties and how we can best set them up to sequester carbon, both mostly in the unplanted vineyard area, but also setting up, pollinator-friendly gardens, orchards, establishing bee colonies, practicing no-till in a lot of these places. So really allowing us to use our vineyards as carbon sinks. And so we have, and then the social impact, how we have programs in our company, Rooted for Good, where each team is invited to give back to the community at least once a year, whether it's through food drives or helping at our parks locally. So we do a lot of community-based activities as well, looking to give back. So I think we're doing an incredible amount as a company, and I'm personally very, very proud of the work that we're taking to improve our local communities as well as the world as a whole.
That's amazing. Now,
Shiva, I just wanted to take one moment that we talk about water. This has come up like 8 times, the use of water.
Yes.
So I wanted to put it into context for people. When you're doing a normal winery plan, it is 8 gallons of water for 1 gallon of wine. It's massive. 8 gallons of water for 1 gallon of wine.
wow.
We have it down to 3.5 gallons per gallon by all using recycling the water, using ozone, using steam, other practices for cleanliness and microbiological stability. So it's down to 3.5. We are extremely proud of that because that has taken so much work, because we all grew up with a certain way to work in wineries, the way you wash the floors, the way you wash your barrels, all the things, because winemaking is 90% housekeeping and in cleanliness. And this has been a real effort on our part. So, and with all the drought that we have and the water issues that we have, particularly in California, but all along the West Coast, this is a really important part. So that's an important figure for us.
Absolutely. Now, last major question, really, I might sneak in another one, but like, as women in wine, how do we, how do you guys maintain sustainability to other women learning from you or around you in your community to better the community? How do you do that?
Well, I know I'm lucky down here that we have a fantastic community with a lot of women winemakers. We even have a group that is the Central Coast Women in Wine. And we will get together, especially come harvest time, we'll get together with any interns that we might have for introductions and networking. We have until the COVID, we had meetings once a month where someone would talk about either like sparkling or whatever they were making in their wineries, different aspects of winemaking, that we would all share our information. We're really, so Santa Barbara County, we're pretty close down here. We have such a tight-knit community. We all know each other. And it's really nice to be able to share information with each other. So we'll sit there and chat and, oh, what are you doing for this? And it's really been great to be so supportive. And I work in a company with Cambria Winery where our GM is a female. We have women winemakers. We have a lot of women in leadership. Our 2 main vineyards are named after Julia and Catherine, which are the daughters of Barbara Banke, who is the CEO of our company. So it's very inclusive when it comes to women. It's really been a fantastic experience for me.
That's
speaking
awesome.
Personally.
Love that.
Yeah, we have a really strong internal community, and then in our own living communities, we have the Girl Gang up here in Oregon, and it all gets together pretty routinely. Samantha is a big part of our Samantha is a big part. We have a Sam up here as well. Is a big part of that. But it's and then one of our founding winemakers, Lynn Penner-Ash, from the eponymous winery Penner-Ash. She has a annual mentoring program, and she holds a luncheon and a whole day of working together and talking together about personal issues. And she's older and raised her 2 kids at the winery, and we've got a lot of young winemaker moms. So it's really helpful for them to hear about how can you juggle those. When Lynn was first applying for her first winery job and finishing up her master's degree, she was told that it's impossible for a woman to have children, and that she was asked if she was going to have children, and she said, well, yes, we plan on it. She was told by her counselor then that it's impossible to be a winemaker and have children at the same time. So she was going to have to choose which of those that she was going to do. And if you've met Lynn, you would know immediately that the answer was, I'm going to do both. And of course, she did. She raised 2 lovely kids. And, Sarah's a mom. There's lots of moms out there and raising their kids and making exceptional wine. And it can be done. But it's a support group like anything. I hope men have the same level of support groups as women, because we really rely on each other. And it's a really close-knit group both inside our winery and then I think in our own communities.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I just like to share, I had the opportunity to be a mentor with the Batonage program down here. They're based in Napa. I mentored 12 women from all over the world, and I would say all of them had a keen interest in the environmental impacts of the wine industry. So we talked at length about, what we can do to further that progress. And I just think it's amazing that this next generation of women who are looking to enter the wine industry are so keen on that. It's definitely wasn't something that was at the forefront of my mind when I entered my career in the wine industry 20 years ago, but I'm so pleased that it's right there in the front of their minds, and happy to support, teaching them more about, as I'm learning, because for me, it is constantly learning, like Eugenia touched on earlier. There's always some new research or some new finding, and I think that's just really appealing to me as well. Always wanting to learn and better what I'm doing as far as a winemaker and involvement in the vineyard.
That's amazing. Now, with the program that you're mentoring in, may I ask, if anybody did want some more information on that, where they can possibly find that?
Yeah, specifically regenerative agriculture, you can go to Regeneration International. They have a ton of information on that page. I would say, a good documentary to watch is Kiss the Ground on Netflix. And there are some, the United States, there's a gentleman who worked on Kiss the Ground that has a bunch of short videos on YouTube. The name is escaping me right now, but he works for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and specifically soil science. Just some really fascinating videos. If you're wanting to learn more about that, I would go in that direction for sure.
Awesome. Now I have time for one last question myself before I ask questions from other people. If we can go around, Eugenia, if we could start with you, and then Samantha, and then Sarah, what was that first moment, that wow moment about sustainability that just got you, that you're just like, whoa, there's something happening here, and I like it, and I want to be a part of this, or it just shook you to your core, or you're just like, I don't know.
It was kind of the other way around. Viticulture is my first love, so I spent a lot of time in the vineyard, and I'm really thrilled that I'm allowed to do that. But this was many years ago. I had my own winery in Russian River, California, and I noticed that as I was, before harvest, we eat a lot of berries. We eat a lot of grapes because you're out there day in and day out tasting grapes. And I would notice after a couple of hours that my lips would feel sort of numb and tingly. And then I noticed it in my fingers after a while. And so I went to the farmer and I started to ask some questions. And then I noticed that some of the workers had very mottled skin around their hands in the first, 3 or 4 inches up their arms. And that set me off. And that was obviously many years ago. And it set me off this was in the 80s, and it set me off in my need to understand more about what was going on in that vineyard. And, I grew up in Sonoma County. I grew up around vineyards, and I never really thought about what was going on out there. It was just the activity around me. But once I was literally in there working and could see these effects, it changed my whole life. And so from that moment forward, and of course, at that point I was starting in the vineyard, not looking forward to everything else. But at that moment forward, I understood that for me, the work that I did in the vineyard, in the vineyards I worked with, had to have a certain level of understanding about the chemistries and the things that we were doing. And that's when you started to learn more about organic and biodynamic. This was long before we had Live and SIP and any of this stuff. This was in the 80s. But you could see right away that there was some sort of reaction, and that was enough to set me on this journey right then and there.
Incredible.
With me, my interest at the time, it wasn't even sustainability. It was just being eco-friendly, eco-conscious, was about 8 years old, getting the Ranger Rick magazines when I was a kid, and just kind of learning about recycling, that it was really kind of starting to become a thing, and learning about different ways to help improve the environment. I grew up on a military base, and I could see all these different animals and creatures, and trying to make sure that they were still around for the future. And it just kind of stuck with me throughout the entirety of my life. And so when I was presented with an opportunity at Cambria, and I saw their different, they have solar panels and all of the different farming, and I fell in love with it.
Amazing.
For me, honestly, it was when I became pregnant. Just thinking back, that was in 2009 with my son. Just wanted to make sure everything went right. I think, feeding yourself with nothing but the best. Then when my son was born, it was like all organic fruits and vegetables, organic formula, etc., organic products, diapers, whatever. I just wanted the best for my child. I was brought on to Maggie Hawk in 2017. And I've been making the wines there, gradually becoming more and more involved. As I did in the vineyard, it's like a child to me. I want the best for that vineyard. And so to me, the best means giving back to the land, not just taking from it. So ultimately, that's how I've really formed my passion for regenerative farming.
That's amazing. We have a couple minutes. I'm going to share my own experience just on the restaurant side. First, for me, I started off in wine very young. Like I did my WSET at about, don't tell anybody, but at 18, which is illegal here. And I just loved it so much. And I was probably like 23 or 24 when I took over my first position as a wine director. It literally just, I was forced to do it. But it was a natural wine bar. And it was a time when natural wine was just but a whisper in the world, and people didn't really understand it and didn't get it or understand really how to sell it. It was often forced onto people, and they were told that they had to like it and that it was right. And maybe they were wrong in their palate, but there were some that were so tasty. What I found was my time at this place, Well, Dinette, I was there for about a year or two, and I think that I took that wine bar and I turned it into a sustainable, organic, biodynamic wine bar, if anything, because it was just tasty. It was consistent. It was delicious. People understood it. People found it more approachable. And I found that people could really get behind that. And I've noticed that I've taken that to every single place that I've gone to, of just, yeah, natural wines, tasty, delicious. You have to find the right ones and really, really be okay with spending that money. But what got me was actually sustainable wines, because there's just so many people who might not be able to afford the certifications, and there's a lot of people who can, and either way people are following it. It meant a lot to them, and they were actually doing good in the world, and the wine tasted so good consistently, and I thought that was absolutely amazing. But yes, that's my experience. I love hearing all of your experiences, and that was an absolute delight. We now get to turn to our lovely, lovely audience and guest, and I get to ask you guys some really fun questions here. We've got some in-depth ones, so this is gonna be really great. So just give me a hot minute. Everybody, have a sip of water, have some tea, maybe have a glass of wine. I'm just gonna filter through these. While I'm going through them, are you guys having a glass of wine this evening, and what is it gonna be?
Great question.
Yeah, I think I have a bottle of Sauv Blanc in the fridge, so probably work on that a little bit.
Yum yums. Eugenia?
Probably rosé, probably chilled rosé.
Ooh, it's that time.
We're actually having some nice weather here in Oregon, so we start pulling out the rosé.
Yeah, I was just up there last week, and you guys are having much better weather than we are even.
Yeah, it happens 3 days a year.
Drink all the rosé you can then in that case.
Yeah.
And yourself, Sarah?
Oh, I don't know. I guess it depends what I'm having for dinner. Depends how the rest of the day goes. Maybe wine, but maybe a cocktail.
I'm going to a park. I assure you, I will be good about it, and I will drink a bottle of, I don't know, either Nera d'Avola, maybe some Frappato, have some pizza. That's what I plan on doing this evening.
I like Frappato too. That's a good one.
It's tasty. It's a pretty vinegar, but it's tasty. Okay, so I have a question here from Maroki. I hope I pronounced that right. Maroki says, I remember in the days when I worked in natural health, there was some form of criticism when it came to valuing certifications or placing too much stock in them. For instance, many certifications can be paid for, but does not actually uphold the brand's responsibility for being organic, sustainable, etc. Are there variances that in the wine world? If so, are there particular certifications that are more respectable to look for?
Well, I know at least with the two that I'm familiar with, which is California Sustainable Wine Growing Association and SIP, those are third-party authenticated. I mean, we get audited. They walk through every aspect of both the vineyards and the wineries. If your wine is certified sustainable, it has to be made with at least 86% sustainable grown grapes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, to get the winery and the vineyard certified, we do have someone actually come out. But I'm only familiar with those two. I don't know if there are other ones that are just, oh, hey, you pay for the certification, here you go. But I of the two that I'm familiar with, and the two that are the largest in at least the state of California, I know that they are valid.
Yeah, I'm sure there are certifications of some kind or certificates that might say this or that, but the organizations that we're talking about, so Oregon Tilth, which is organic, Demeter, which is biodynamic, and then Live and SIP. These are individuals who have gone through quite a bit of training themselves and know some unbelievable things, because that's all they do is prepare for this kind of work. They are often not just doing vineyards. These are people who work in certification for all sorts of agriculture. So that's their emphasis. Yep. And I'm sure there are opportunities to buy things, but these organizations that we're talking about are international. We mentioned Europe. The Europeans have this exact same organic and biodynamic rules that we do in America. The Live is actually based in Switzerland. So, the Europeans, they're kind of ahead of us normally in sustainability because they have small countries and limited resources. And we have a great big country and it appears infinite resources, although we know that's not true. So I think that these are things you can absolutely count on. There could well be other certifications that are cheaters, but I've never actually heard of anybody using one in our industry, quite frankly. We've never had a scandal of that kind that I know of. We've had lots of scandals, but not that one.
Okay, Samantha, would you like to add in to that, or shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah, no, I think that was dead on.
Yeah.
You know those moments where you where you like sit back and you're like, whoa, these people are really cool. How is this happening? It keeps happening to me right now. Okay, so I have a question from Josh here. As sustainability becomes more mainstream in the industry, things tend to branch out. Beyond biodynamics, how does cosmoculture come into play, and is it making a bigger appearance in North America?
Cosmoculture. I don't know. So specifically that, I would assume that's related to biodynamics.
Yes.
Because there's plenty of people that practice that and I think don't get certified. Getting back to any of them, there's plenty. I think it's just more bringing it back to the consumer. If you're really curious, ask the questions. If you're really passionate about supporting businesses that practice those things, do the research and ask those questions. Because many of them do practice it and don't get the certification.
Fair. Would anybody like to add to that? No? Okay. My next question here, I've got a couple questions around marketing and shipping and sustainability. What about how wine is shipped to export countries? Styrofoam, cardboard. Can you guys talk about this out of curiosity of just, are there more sustainable ways to ship wine and share wine? Because Eugenia, you had mentioned the exporting of wine via trucks, glass bottles, etc.
We don't use styrofoam. We use packaging materials that are recyclable, or the really cool ones that you put in water and they dissolve. Those are the best. You could get the little popcorny things and you just drop them in water and they just literally disappear. Cool. They don't. The chemist in us knows that they don't just disappear, but they redefine themselves. But we don't ship wine to Europe that way. When we do ship wine to Europe, it's done in pallets. So it's literally cases that go right on the pallet and are shipped over. Domestically, of course, there's a lot of shipping, and there are companies probably that still use styrofoam. Most advanced companies have dropped styrofoam. There's nothing good about it. We really shy away from that. So if you're getting your wine in styrofoam, to Sarah's earlier point, you need to do some research and figure out who you're buying your wine from.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Okay, I have a question. If anybody can speak to vegetal covers within the vineyard and sustainability.
Can you say what was the first part of that?
It's just our lovely Veronica here would like to know a little bit more about vegetal covers within the vineyard.
So cover crops, I think, is really the question, Sarah.
Okay. Yeah, so cover crop, I think, is huge in regenerative agriculture, not just the incorporation of it between the vine rows, but the diversity of it. So, what we're looking at in Jackson Family Wines is not just having 1, 2, or 3 different types of cover crops in between your vine rows, but more like 4 to 6 different types. And then letting it grow, not killing it, but leaving it in the ground. The roots from the cover crop create kind of the air pockets and also aid in the communication of the microbiological activity, the mycorrhizae that transport all the nutrients from the vine between the vine and the cover crop. It's quite amazing what's happening underground, and I think we're getting more and more education on that, but it's not only the carbon sequestration, but that nutrient transport that's happening in the activity underground is equally as important. So diversifying your cover crop is a really big deal.
Wow. Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, the other great thing about cover crop is it helps stabilize the ground. So if we ever do get rain, it'll keep us from having a big muddy runoff. It helps that water soak into the ground and go into the water table in the ground. So just an added benefit.
Now,
right, and erosion, erosion as well. It helps with that.
What do you guys find are the most popular cover crops?
I would say, radish and pea There are different kinds of grasses. I think, you can seed it. You could also let it grow natively. So whatever you have around your site, just let it grow natively. But I think primarily you want clover, radish, pea, some grasses, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think we have hay on ours right now.
Oh, really cool. Now, for both Samantha and Sarah, we have a question here. Can you tell us or talk about the amount of sulfur used for your wineries and your wines?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think that, I aim for my Pinot Noirs to be around the low 30s range parts per million. Chardonnays, because of the lower pH, I stick to a low 20 part per million. I really look at molecular sulfur, which is the type of sulfur that protects you against any microbiological activity, unwanted microbiological activity. So and it's heavily based on pH. So I try to add as little sulfur as possible as required to maintain microbial activity in my wines, because I ultimately don't want to filter or refine anything. I haven't had to, so that's how I like to keep it.
Well, and just from my own perspective, working in the laboratory, we do check the wines every month to make sure that they are stable, that they have the protection that they need. So we're not just willy-nilly adding sulfur. We're making sure that we're adding it at the time that it needs it, and we're only adding the amount that it needs. So it's not just throwing sulfur at it in hopes that it sticks. Like we are looking at it very heavily.
It's often unknown that people don't realize that the fermentation process gives off some sulfur on its own. So it's not if you do nothing, if you add none, that doesn't mean there's none there, because that's a natural byproduct of fermentation. And that can be sort of 6 to 10 parts. And as Sarah was saying, she's somewhere between 25 and 32 or 3 based on the wine. So you can see it's a small adjustment. If you were to look at wines that are shipped across the world, you'd probably see some higher numbers than that, because they have to come all the way across the sea and they need a lot of protection. But you'll find that high-end and higher-end winemaking is going to use less sulfur, because you've built in those protections in your winemaking. Sarah's talking about not filtering and not fining. So this is part of your winemaking process. So it's probably be interesting to know what a salad bar looks like, but these are very, very low, very, very low additions.
I'd also like to add that sulfur is also used in the vineyard. And as Eugenia, kind of mentioned, yeast, a natural byproduct of fermentation by yeast, is sulfur. So even if you were to add anything, the yeast produce it as part of the reaction of converting sugar to alcohol. And so also, just backing up to vineyard, organics allow you to spray sulfur in the vineyard as a preventative measure for rot. So you don't, sulfur will be present in your wine and traces, at some point.
Yeah, and you can't farm without the sulfur. Let's be really clear that when we talk about what you cannot do, if you don't do that, you will lose your crop every year very successfully. I can assure you,
Yeah.
if you don't do those sulfur sprays, you will lose your crop.
May I ask, in that situation, what is the first tell sign that you're about to lose your crop if you're not using sulfur?
The first mildew that you will see, actually,
mildew and rot,
even right now where we're just barely budding out, you'll get mildew on the canes themselves.
Yeah.
Right? It's so bad, it will overwinter there every year for you. And rather than affect the leaves and the grapes, which is what we worry about, it would be so bad that it would actually affect the whole vine itself. So you wouldn't be farming without it. I might add, it's elemental, so that we make it's clear it's not an added chemistry. Some people misunderstand that. Sulfur is an element, a natural element.
And it's in everything.
It's not synthetic. Yeah, it's not synthetic.
Yeah. And I feel like that's something that people often forget, that even in your regular products, like dried fruit, for example, you're going to find it.
Yep.
But yes. Okay. I have this question here. What is the most important change in consumer behavior that needs to change to make wine more sustainable?
I think just supporting sustainable
It's a great
products.
question. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the consumers are really interested in sustainability and that they want to support that, then support products that are produced sustainably. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, it costs a little more
Here-
money, and using your checkbook to support those companies that are doing the right thing is really, really important. And that's back to Sarah's research. Know who you're buying from. Know what you're buying.
Absolutely. And I remember in our discussion as well, previously, it's so important to realize what you're putting in your body. Like, why are you drinking this product? What is it going to do for you? Do you care about what it's going to do to you physically? It does have effects.
Mhm.
I often feel that, like, even when you're sitting down to have a nice dinner, and you're at a wicked restaurant, you're paying good money. How do you feel after you leave? How do you feel the next day? These are really important questions, especially if you find a wine that you like and you're going to consistently consume it. What do you want from it? Like, do you want just that one temporary moment where you just feel really good in your glass or wine or two? Or does it matter how you feel in the long term as well? And I think that's really important to see your own sustainability. And then I have a question here for Sarah. Sarah was talking about low interventions. Could you talk about other additives in wine besides sulfur? What is considered acceptable in sustainable wine?
Yeah, so I can talk about, I mean, there's companies that are, they, for their living, they make an enormous amount of products that you can add to wine. Some of them have proven useful in aiding with the smoke impact. Aside from yeast, so there's commercial yeast, there's nutrients for the yeast, there's enzymes, all kinds of things. A lot of them are starting to become more naturally based. Some of them are not. So I think it's ultimately asking those questions of your producer. And a lot of them, for export reasons, are required to report those things on a file. So I'm sure if you contacted your local distributor or store that they could provide that information for you if you really had concerns about that. As far as requirements go, I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Samantha and Eugenia, once it gets to the winery, as far as sustainability goes, additives aren't part of the equation.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the nutrients.
It's mostly in the vineyard.
Right. And the nutrients are vitamins, I mean, folic acid and real live vitamins.
They're vitamins,
Just like you and I would take. We literally feed the yeast and we feed them the same kind of thing. You literally could eat that and it wouldn't hurt you. Wine is a very safe product because with the pH and the alcohol, nothing can live there. The only thing that can hurt you in wine is when you drink too much. There's nothing about the wine itself that nothing can grow in there or really harm you in any way. And we don't add anything that would harm you. You can. There are products out there, but like live certification, Samantha will have to tell me about SIP, but any of those kinds of products are absolutely banned. Anything that's a plastic filtration or those things, you can't use those if you're in these certified programs.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a list of products that have been used in the wine industry that you are not allowed to use if you're going to be certified. And to kind of just back up, I actually used to work for one of those companies that would sell winemaking products and supplies. And to look at the sustainability of it, you really have to look at your producer or the supplier and see how they're shipping it. And are they using too much packaging? Stuff like that. So there really there's no metric for looking at sustainably produced winemaking products. But if you're interested in the sustainability of those winemaking products, look at how they're packaged.
Now, question here. Jackson Family Wines, delicious. Sustainably speaking, what are some other wineries? If you guys can all name a winery that you just think is doing an amazing job that you would like our guests to also pay attention to and support, who would they be that you think are making big changes in the world?
I'll go with, I think, the initiator of, biodynamic and organic farming and winemaking would be in Northern California would be Fetzer. They've been a huge leader on that since like the 80s. So, that's one thing that's interesting is a lot of this stuff, buzzwords are created recently, but a lot of people have been doing this for decades, if not centuries. A lot of indigenous peoples were farming crops and making food this way. So it's just, I think, more relatable now with the climate change that we're seeing.
Boy, I would think if you go to the Live or the SIP website, and they'll have their wineries listed there, and you can find it will show you the breadth of work that's being done in our industry and the number of wineries that take this really seriously. And again, I think it's because we're agriculturally based. And if you don't have your land, you don't have your crop. And if you don't have that, you don't really have anything in our business. You can't make this stuff up in the lab. But some of our early pioneers, like Erath, which is now owned by Saint Michel, and Adelsheim, and these people have been doing recycling and had benefits for their employees and paid overtime and done all of these things for years. Willamette Valley Vineyards. There's a really long list of responsible people in our industry. There are the ones that are irresponsible are the ones that you read about and hear about because they make the news and they're flashy, but it's really a small number, I think, in the overall industry. We are leaders and we're very proud of that, but we're not the only ones doing this work.
No, very true. And just to kind of piggyback on what you said, Eugenia, if you go on the SIP website, you can find lists of people who are certified and vineyards who are certified, wineries who are certified. And I mean, it's a veritable shopping list, really. So we have a lot of places local to our area, in Paso, where you can see that they're sustainable. And it's really great to be surrounded by people who care.
That's amazing. So it is time. We've had a really great time. I've had a great time. But I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you, Sarah, Samantha, Eugenia, for taking the time and educating us and also just making the conversation so exciting and accessible. I find that oftentimes you hear these words and you just don't know where to start. And I feel like you really broke it down and just made it really exciting and fun. We should also take a moment to thank our sponsors. We have Jackson Family Wines, and also thank you to FDM here. If you wanted to donate, which would be so lovely, you can go online to our website. That would be awesome. The donations go towards all scholarships for women in wine. Again, that is FdV for scholarships. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us. That was really awesome.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Shiva.
Thank you.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day, everyone.
Happy Earth Day.
Yeah.